Welcome, everybody. We have about half the group here that's registered. We're real excited, as busy as everybody is, to be coming tonight for a great conversation on an incredibly important and timely topic, environmental justice. And we want to thank particularly Alex Darrow, our portfolio director for environmental justice and environmental issues for the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn. And we'll, again, get started in just a moment. So please hang on. Go get your water or a cup of coffee or whatever it is you're drinking, and we'll get started in just a moment. Karin, I'm going to wait just one more minute because our numbers have kind of plateaued, and then we'll go ahead and get started so we can use the entire time. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to leave our slide up here as we welcome everybody, and then we'll take it down so that you'll see our panelists more full screen as we get into our discussion and dialogue today. But what I'd like to do is turn this over now to Kristen, my co-president, to welcome everybody.
All right. Good evening and welcome to all of you and our community and our panelists this evening. We're very excited to discuss the topic this evening of environmental justice. My name is Kristen Malone, and I'm one of the co-presidents of the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn, along with Erica Nelson this year. The last 2 years, we've been co-presidents. For those of you who are new to the League of Women Voters, we are a nonpartisan organization. We encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. The League does not support any candidate or political party. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influence public policy through education and advocacy. The League is celebrating its 101 birthday, you could say, this year. We are very excited about this. If you would like to join the League, you can learn more about our organization at the website, lwvge.org. Joining the League would be a great way to celebrate Women's History Month this March. Those attending tonight may place a question in the Q&A. We will try to answer as many questions as we can this evening, time permitting. A video of this evening's Zoom webinar will be available to watch or forward to anyone you think that might be interested on our YouTube channel and on our website. At the end of the discussion, my co-president Erica Nelson will close and provide a reminder about our upcoming candidate forum. I would like to introduce now Alex Darrow, the League's Director of National Resources and the Environment. She set up our discussion and introduced the panelists and our moderator this evening. Thank you so much, Alex.
Hello, everybody. So thank you so much for the turnout. I know there's a lot of competing activities within Glen Ellyn and in the region. So tonight's panel, as you are aware, is environmental justice. And so as noted, I am the portfolio director for natural resources and the environment for the League of Women Voters for Glen Ellyn. And this topic, actually the environmental justice topic as emerged as a concept in the United States in the early 1980s and is beginning to sort of create, get more traction. But recently the EPA came up and started using this definition as you see posted. So, and which I think it's just succinct and helpful. So I'll just read it, quickly out loud. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. This goal will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards and equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. So in essence, it is an interdisciplinary study that involves the social sciences, environmental laws, sustainability, and political ecology. With that, we have a very interesting panel, which I cannot wait to hear what they have to say. We have Michael Childress, who is the local president of the NAACP for DuPage County. We also have Jack Darren, who is with the Sierra Club. And we have our own Jeff Garris, who I'm very proud to say is a league member. You do not have to be a woman to participate in our league. And he is the, I've forgotten what district, I'll let him introduce himself. With that, I'm going to turn it over. So thank you so much.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. My name is Karen Daly, and I am the Vice President of Communications for the League of Women Voters of Glen Ellyn. And this is one of our community meetings, and the last several community meetings have been discussions with panels, which have been really great because you can really dive into a topic, and they're a little bit more conversational than like a PowerPoint presentation. So we always look forward to some good back and forth. It's tougher on Zoom in some ways because we're trying to look at the camera, make sure we're looking at the Q&A, but we'll get started. I'm happy to have these three wonderful panelists. It is Women's History Month, so we decided to celebrate Women's History Month by giving the women all the night off tonight and only having male panelists. So we thought that would be a good way to start. But welcome to you, all experts in their field, and we're so excited to have you here. We're going to take turns asking everybody questions. The answers will be somewhat succinct, but we're trying to build off of each other as well. One reminder is that the league is nonpartisan, and we're very serious about that. While we respect everybody's opinions, we just want everyone to know who's watching that the opinions expressed by the panelists are not necessarily those of the league itself. And if anybody is interested in any of our positions, they can find those on our website, but we are strictly nonpartisan. So let's get started. This topic is pretty meaty, and we have the definition that Alex so nicely set up. So we're going to start with thinking and talking about that definition, which I think everybody read along with Alex. So the question to the panelists is, what do we mean by environmental justice, and how the Environmental Protection Agency defines it may not be how everybody defines it. Is there anything else that you personally would like to add to that definition to help the audience kind of understand the concept and its meaning and its importance and kind of what the stakes are at this time? And so we'll go ahead and we'll start with Jack.
Thank you. Again, Jack Darren from the Sierra Club. I want to thank the league for not only the invitation to participate, but just for having this conversation, and particularly focusing on of all the different things that you could talk about in terms of important environmental issues today, climate change and the extinction crisis, waste issues. Centering environmental justice, particularly for your members, is really spot on in terms of where we're at and where we need to be educating ourselves and learning how to be allies to those who need our help the most. Question about the definition of environmental justice, I think historically has been around for several decades. And I think that the classic definition to me is acknowledging the disproportionate impact that pollution and problems caused by pollution, like climate change, have on different populations of people. We are not equally exposed to these environmental problems. And it is statistically, anecdotally, and thoroughly demonstrated that people who face other systemic challenges in our society, be it racism, economic inequality, other types of marginalization, happen to be more exposed to these threats, whether it's pollution in their neighborhood or the impacts of global problems like climate change. And so environmental justice is, I always view environmental justice as framed in the positive of trying to deliver justice to communities that have long been denied it because of these disproportionate impacts. But I want to say that I feel like this definition has grown in really good ways in recent years, and particularly in the last year in COVID. And we're realizing that when folks who are most impacted by the problems that we're trying to solve as environmental advocates aren't able to participate, because they can't participate in our democracy, our economy, our society to the same extent that others of us can. They're really lacking in the empowerment, and they're the ones who most need it. So environmental justice to us is now including things like economic inequality, trying to find solutions to that, combating systemic racism, standing with those immigrant communities that are having to fight for their safety and their right to even be here. Some of those like really first level needs are gateways, solving those problems, helping those communities solve those problems, really help them get into a position of advocating for the environmental challenges they face. So I think it's an evolving definition, and I think that's really good.
That's great. And I apologize. I had thought you were introduced at the upfront, and my mistake. So again, I'm sorry. This is Jack Darren, who's the chapter director of the Sierra Club, and he's been with the Sierra Club for 32 years. We also have Michael Childress, who I'll ask to speak next. He is the DuPage County NAACP president. He's been with the NAACP for about 5 years. And Jeff Garris, DuPage Forest Preserve Commissioner, who's actually had some experience at the US EPA and with the state of Ohio, and is League of Women. I think we did mention that he's a League of Women Voters member. So we're so happy to have all three of you here. I think we do have a longer resume on our website if anybody is interested in checking that out. So that said, I'll move over to Michael. And if you can either build on what Jack said, or if NAACP has their own definition, please share that with us.
Okay. I'd like to say, first of all, I've been president probably going on 7 years. But I've been a member of the NAACP about 20 years. It's a good thing that I'm a member, because I'm an activist before anything else, and fighting for social change and justice is just something that I do. When it comes to environmental justice, we see it as a civil rights and a human rights issue. That's how it's framed in the eyes of the NAACP. A lot of the citizens today don't make the connection between pollution and high sea level, and we think that everything affects everything. Climate change, pollution, rising sea levels, everything affects everything when it comes to the environment. And as you see, when there's a dynamic change in the environment, the climate changes, and then there's some major catastrophe. If you look at last night, just think about this year. We've had a major snowstorm go through the south, freeze everything. And then last night, tornadoes went through the deep south. So all of these things are interconnected, and we have to understand that as we study environmental justice. And the NAACP created an environmental justice and EJ program in 2009. And we actually have an entire pamphlet book. In fact, it's 183 pages, how we're going to fight climate change and fight for environmental justice. One of the things we noticed, when you have these high level polluters, they're always in areas of poor Black and brown people. They don't put those factories in areas of the affluent. I'd like to see the reaction if a high polluting factory decided they were going to build one in the middle of Naperville, and what that reaction would be. But what happens is they make poor and brown people under the guise of we're bringing jobs to your area. You have to choose between employment and the health of your family and your life. And that is a travesty of justice.
Yes.
And we feel like we have to continue to fight on all fronts when it comes to that.
Jeff, more to add on the definition of environmental justice?
Yes. And I'll speak to my EPA role. For a number of years, I was involved with an air pollution program. And we actually, I think in the 90s, we were very much interested in engaging people in large cities, going into those communities that have been underserved by environmental agencies who deal with a lot of air pollution and water pollution and toxic dumps, like in Detroit, it was one area I spent a lot of time in all kinds of neighborhoods, where there might be people from the Middle East living there, or Black African Americans. Detroit is mainly people of color. And you go there and it's shocking what you see. And what was even more shocking was I didn't necessarily have the tools to deal with it. So that was perhaps an early example of systemic racism, where all the regulations that we had to enforce weren't necessarily appropriate for dealing with urban settings like this. And so it was frustrating. And one of the things I also learned about that going forward was, and I think as far as the definition goes, it's sort of evolving in my mind. I think we used earlier definitions of environmental justice at the EPA. I mean, worded slightly different than it is now. But the bottom line, I think, is human health. I had a chance to talk with Gina McCarthy once, who's a former director, or administrator, I should say, of the EPA. And now she's directing climate policies in the White House. And her number one issue is human health. So I'm thinking, number one, we got to look at the whole person, the whole community. What are they dealing with? Do they have access to food, and high quality food? Like out here in DuPage County, they're organizing a food co-op where you can get food from farmers. But how often do you see food co-ops forming in certain urban areas where you have people of lower incomes who are dealing with other issues, and they don't have the wherewithal to form a co-op? And so you can see how all this interrelates, and it's very systemic, the impacts and how we deal with it. And it's a huge, huge challenge. But I'm glad we're here talking about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And these are excellent examples. And that was leading to the next question. And Michael had asked or mentioned already the storms, bringing climate change. But I think the best way to make this issue come alive for people is to have some examples. And certainly we've seen Flint and the Flint water situation. We've seen things like the recent hunger strike for the metal processing plant in the city of Chicago, and the folks who don't want that in their neighborhood, even though it's a residential neighborhood. If there are other examples, local or national ones, that kind of bring this issue to life, I think that would be great to have a few examples. And Michael, would you like to start with that?
Well, it's kind of ironic. I used to live in Detroit, well, not in Detroit, but near Detroit. And understanding Detroit is kind of interesting. It's an interesting place. Again, just like Jeff said, it is the blackest city I've ever been in. It really is. And the one thing about the area, it has some of the cleanest water. The Detroit River is fed from the Great Lakes, and the water is very pure. But then you notice that in Flint, they stopped getting their water from the Detroit River and rerouted it, and that's how the whole crisis started. The water that they were using was so corrupt, it corroded the pipes and just ruined the whole city. Well, unbeknownst to a lot of people, Flint is just a microcosm of what's going on in the country. We have our own Flint in Illinois, and I think we've been working with the Sierra Club down in Centerville, down near East St. Louis. They have had their version of the Flint water crisis for years. The city itself in Centerville is probably about 99% African American and about 90% senior citizens. The youth have all gone, and the water backup is horrendous. It sewage is pumped up into people's backyards, and we're talking everything from human feces to feminine products. These people are the property value is nothing. They cannot sell their property. Again, the kids have just checked out and said, we're out of here, and they're gone. And now you have these seniors there who can't sell. The town itself is reduced to bottled water, but it's not a high media place that people was going to shine the light on. And to think that Centerville is an isolated incident, or Flint is an isolated incident, it's not. And water is the key of life. So if you can't have clean water, then what do you have? You have no life.
And it brought it to life, and even there were charges against some of the legislators, which is rare to happen. But it's these kind of flashpoints of things that do make the news that sometimes can bring about change. So that's a good point. And you mentioned you work with Jack, or you work with the Sierra Club and some of those efforts. Jack, do you want to, or any other examples come to life that come
Those
to
are
mind that
two that have really been top of mind. Karen, the Southeast Side facility you mentioned is called General Iron. This is a facility, it's a scrap metal recycler that basically was forced out of largely white Lincoln Park in the city, and is relocating on the largely Latinx community of the Southeast Side, or hoping to. We're hoping that the city of Chicago is going to tell them that they can't do that, because to us that's clearly environmental racism, is moving something unacceptable in a white community and trying to put it in a Black and brown community. We've seen a couple others in Chicago. We've seen the people of Little Village worked very hard to close a coal plant that was a major respiratory health threat in their community. And that was a huge win for respiratory health back in 2012, if I remember right. And they thought that something clean was going to take its place. And now they've been battling over a huge logistics and distribution facility that would generate a lot of truck traffic. And the smokestacks from the coal plant were demolished with almost no notice to the community in the early weeks of COVID-19 in early April of last year. And right, this is in the middle of a respiratory health pandemic. They're sort of intentionally injected to very dangerous dust clouds as a result of these massive smokestack implosions. These collectively, and Michael, thank you for the story about Centerville. That is just it's a remarkable story of what's happened to that community, and it's going to be difficult to solve, but we've also engaged with them over the last year. And I think that the solutions are not going to be quick there, but we all need to be allies for that community in particular. But the fact that all these things are happening in this pandemic, when these are the same communities that are so disproportionately stressed by the pandemic itself and its economic ramifications, have really underlined the need to do not just fight these local battles, but to make some systemic reforms. And I'm encouraged that these communities, which have really had their hands full with these very intense local fights, are actually thinking big picture and thinking about fundamental reforms to the way that Illinois enforces environmental laws and relates to these communities. And I'm really hopeful that we're going to see some action in Springfield this spring to make some of those changes.
And Jeff, I think you bring an interesting perspective in that Page County and Glen Ellyn focus, but you've also had the national experience here. Are there, building on any of the other stories or other examples that you want to share with us about?
Yeah, I've seen my share of scrapyards. I won't cover that again, but I think in DuPage County, there's been a couple of stories I could share real quickly. One goes back history-wise, because I think a lot of the industrial legacy of DuPage County is gone now, including the Fox Valley. A lot of the old factories closed. But we did have a plant in West Chicago that involved radioactive materials, and which actually ended up polluting the West Branch of the DuPage River all the way to Naperville. And we also had issues with people using materials from the plant to backfill in their yards around foundations when they build houses. And so there's radiation in people's yards. And this impacted disproportionately a Hispanic community in the South Side. I think there was it was a very difficult issue because I think it divided the city in some ways. But we did get that cleaned up. But if you talk to somebody who's an activist today in that community, they will say, yeah, but there was no reparations. I mean, we had people who got sick, they died. There was a cancer cluster. We got nothing out of it except they cleaned it up, of course. And the DuPage River had to be restored at great cost. You can contrast that with a more recent example of a plant that wanted to start up. When it was discovered, there was ethylene oxide plant in I think Willowbrook area. And all of a sudden people became aware of it. I don't know how that happened, but all of a sudden, but there was an instant organization. The whole community sort of rose up. They got state legislatures involved and other elected officials, and it became a bipartisan effort to deal with this plant. And I think they've been essentially forced out of business there. But this was a white community, and you can see how the difference between when your community where there's people of color, lower income, and versus a more affluent area, the differences in the way the community responds to it, they see as a threat to their families. And but to their credit, the people who are fighting the ethylene oxide plant in the sterilization process, they were very concerned about, well, where would this plant go? Would it be moving to another area where there would be an environmental justice issue? And so they were trying to raise the alarm nationally, and they're trying to make connections with people in other states, say, watch out for these guys. Mm-hmm. So I applaud them for that.
We have a section later where we talk about what are things that communities can do. And I think some of these, when there's an accident or when there's a new factory going in or something, these are the real flashpoints that can get motivation. And so we talk about that in a little bit too. But we're going to stick with you, Jeff, on this next question because we want to talk about the EPA, the change of administrations. There's a new EPA head who was just confirmed not too long ago, named Michael Regan. And he's the first person of color to hold that role. In his administration confirmation hearing, he said, environmental justice is just something that is near and dear to my heart. What I'm going to ask all of you, but what, Jeff, do you think some of his administration's focus areas should be as he looks at, putting together his team and his agenda for his tenure?
Okay, great. Actually, I think he's the second person of color. We had Lisa Jackson a number of years ago as administrator.
First man of color then. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. First man of color. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I think with climate change, that's going to bring some new challenges. And I think of, entire communities being threatened in new ways. And it'd be, like I'm thinking of New Orleans, for instance. They've already had a catastrophic hurricane in recent years. They're still recovering. And what about the shoreline in the Delta areas has been damaged over the years, and you have more issues with water coming in and threatening the city, and the flooding in a hurricane is the most catastrophic aspect of it. And so you have vulnerable communities like that. And so I think you would have to be looking at how to address future threats and really to make sure that we're adapting and we're helping communities in a way that's cost effective. I think that, there are communities in North Carolina, for instance, that are now practically islands, and they're going to be gone, so that you have to relocate. Native Americans in Alaska, some of them are being forced to relocate now because the polar regions are changing so rapidly. So I think a focus on adapting to future issues and how to deal with those in a just way. I think that's going to be a big challenge, and they have to be very explicit about how they're going to approach that.
Well, particularly as they have also a climate czar, coordinating all the efforts of many agencies and the military, et cetera, and how the EPA fits into all of that. Yeah. Michael, your perspective on our new EPA head and what job he has ahead of him?
I think that he needs to focus on cleaning up the environment around these factories these coal-fired plants that are emitting toxic waste into the air. It's near and dear to the Black community that he works on that, because when you look at the numbers, it's beyond horrendous. It's beyond systemic racism. You can't just write it off on any level. When you think about it, 2.7 million Blacks have asthma. And then you go back and you look at the numbers, and 40 African Americans are 40% more likely to have asthma. And we're 3 times more likely to die from asthma. And then when you look where all of these factories are, they're in Black and brown communities. We have to go back and make that correlation, because again, as I said in the beginning, everything affects everything. You know, climate change affects the factories affect the climate change. They're spewing these things into the air. We're having greenhouse effects. It's affecting the food supply and the supply chain of food. It is going into, then you turn around and you look at some of these urban areas, which we spoke about earlier. They're food deserts. There's no way to look at it any other way. When you can go and buy a bag of Cheetos easier than you can buy strawberries, that's a problem.
That's a problem.
And we need to have them look at how we clean up these factories. How do we either shut them down or have them adhere to? I think a lot of the laws are on the books. I just think that they're ignoring it. And then I hear politicians stand up and champion things like, "Oh, we're the deregulation party," or we deregulate everything. You need to hear what you're saying when you say we want to deregulate. That means that there's a regulation. There's a reason that the regulation is on the book, and you just wiped it off. And now the water's polluted, the air's polluted, and people of color are suffering. So again, it all ties back to civil rights, human rights, and I hope he takes a look at that.
Jack, the perspective from the Sierra Club, EPA focus areas.
Yeah, well, I would just say, first of all, I think the Biden administration is off to a great start. And this is not just the fact that the Trump administration is gone. We're really impressed by some of the people who come into key positions, including at the top of EPA, but also other places of the administration. And the fact that from really very early days, the messaging and the substance has been very clear that they view this as environmental justice and equity as central, whether we're talking about at the global level in terms of how we're rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement, or how we're going to take a look at environmental regulations that were weakened during the Trump administration. So I would say that, you know, just in the first couple of months here, that both the substance and the optics and the messaging have been really strong about getting America back on track. And again, not just turning back the bad stuff that we all lived through for the last 4 years, but really moving quickly ahead. Sierra Club is working at the federal level for something called the Thrive Agenda, which is a little bit equal parts of the Green New Deal and COVID recovery and racial justice agenda. And so we're really hoping that that is a blueprint for the infrastructure package that Congress is going to take up next, so that in making up for lost time, it's been a long time since we've had a big investment in American infrastructure, that we do that in a way to create jobs in places where they're needed most and make progress on a lot of these environmental and environmental justice challenges.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We've talked a little bit about each of your organizations and what you're doing specifically in this area. And this is your chance to sort of elaborate on on what the Sierra Club's doing, what the NAACP is doing, and Jeff's what's happening at the Forest Preserve. So Jack, since you're already warmed up here and talking about the infrastructure, for example, efforts, what are other things that are the Sierra Club, is the Sierra Club looking at from an environmental justice perspective?
So I guess a couple things. One is, especially during COVID, we've learned that it can't always be about what our priorities are, that particularly in times of crisis, that sometimes we need to use our power and whatever resources we have to stand by these communities that are most at risk with what's threatening them in the moment, and not always be just about going to communities and asking them to be for things that we think are important, but starting from a place of allyship. And so that has meant a lot of different things over the last year. That has meant things that we weren't working on, frankly, a year ago, like preventing water from being shut off so people could wash their hands during a pandemic, for example, making sure that we're not shutting off people's electricity and taking steps to control rates. So starting with a very basic level of response. I think and I was in the process of typing an answer to Vera in the chat about a little village and the need for just transition around coal plants. A very big deal for us right now is the Clean Energy Jobs Act in Springfield. We see this as an opportunity for many things, but in particular for coal plant communities or former coal plant communities like Little Village, to, instead of just like leaving these communities on their own and leave them to the whims of the corporations that close these plants, we need a state strategy for replacing these dirty facilities with something cleaner. And CEJA, or the Clean Energy Jobs Act, has proposals for that, to create a just transition fund and centering community voices in what happens at those sites. Let's make sure that they're cleaned up responsibly. There's a lot of coal ash at these sites that needs to be dealt with, but let's make those responsible, clean it up, and let's put the community in charge with a plan for what comes next. Those are just a couple of things we're working on.
That's great. Jeff, I'm going to switch this one up a little bit on you, just because you're the only one here who's an elected official. And so you're representing, as an elected official, people who think very, very different sides on this issue, very different. What is the Forest Preserve doing, looking at in this area in terms of what your focus is with regard to environmental justice and balancing the needs of the community?
Yeah, well, I don't know if, to be honest, the Forest Preserve District has really focused on this at all in the past. I have no real sense of that. I've been in office a few months. But one thing you'll notice is that they're free. If you want to come and visit a forest preserve, there's no income requirement. You just things I'd be looking for is accessibility. And for example, most communities in DuPage County aren't too far from a green space, so they can go out and walk, ride a bicycle. And we're working on a trail system in DuPage County, and hopefully that will connect people who wouldn't necessarily have a car, like they could ride their bike in a safe manner to get to work instead of riding on a street, And we need more. We have issues with obstacles like railroad tracks or like Roosevelt Road, for instance. We're trying to get a trail following the East Branch of the DuPage River. I think that's going to be a large infrastructure project long-term. It's going to be built piecemeal. But if that interconnects communities a little bit better, and if that could be considered an active transportation route for not only just recreation, but for people getting to work, I think that could have EJ implications. I think another thing is we need more outreach. We need to focus on talking to certain communities, people who may consider themselves minorities, or they have a certain agenda. They might be in an ethnic group. There's like 80 languages spoken in DuPage County. It's a very diverse place. Some people are clustered in communities, like in West Chicago or Addison. And some areas are a little bit less easily accessible for getting into the preserves. But finally, I think once people do get into preserves, I think they should all feel comfortable there. They should feel safe. Near as I can tell, we have a police force, and I'll be watching how they respond to anything that happens that's unusual. I think they're very professional, but we all have this implicit bias. This when we see somebody, we make assumptions. Why is that Hispanic guy sitting in his car? He's not doing anything. He's just sitting in his car. What's that all about? I mean, as a white person, you might have that kind of reaction, but another person may not have that kind of reaction. And I'd be very concerned about how police view that. I think in general, they're interested in making people feel comfortable and safe and being focused on public service. We also have rangers. And but I think we could work with the Sierra Club and other groups to inspire people to go outside. The Sierra Club has an Inspiring Connections Outdoors program, which I don't think is used that much in DuPage. But if we have groups of people that just aren't getting outside, that's part of the whole human health aspect. That if you're healthy and you're thriving and you're living in a place where you've got green space nearby, that's good for your well-being mentally and physically. And that proved to be very important during the pandemic. I think lots of people came to preserves, and people of all sorts. I noticed Latinos walking alone in a preserve. It was probably a safe place for them. They got away from the usual hustle and bustle. They were in nature. They often come here from rural areas of Mexico where they just were used to a verdant landscape. And so they appreciate it.
That's great. These have a as you're ramping up, you have also some partners here on within the League of Women Voters and on this panel who can perhaps help make some of your initiatives come to light. Michael, your organization and some of the things that you're focused on right now with regard to this issue.
We have 3 clear goals from our EJ, and it's in writing, and we all know what they are. The first one is to reduce emissions. That goes without saying. We are intent on shutting down a number of these coal-fired plants at the local level. And not only that, we want to monitor and enforce the regulations that they have at the state and local levels. Number 2 is we want to go and promote clean energy, renewables, phase out all of these fossil fuels. If we can phase those out and go to the renewable, it's going to make for a healthier environment. And finally, what we want to do is focus on a climate action plan. We would like to see that in all communities of color. And with that action plan, again, we want to advocate for food justice, cleaning up the food desert. We also want to advocate for equity in transportation. Because as we start to move to renewables, that's going to affect the buses and electric cars, the whole 9 on that. And then finally, we want to uphold the civil rights, because again, we still see environmental justice as a human right, a civil right. And to piggyback on what Jeff and what Jack was saying, when you promote those jobs in those areas, just because they're poor doesn't mean that we have to put those polluting jobs in their environment. If you can transfer that area into clean jobs, now again, you have poor Black and brown people that have income. And income means that they become taxpayers. They're going to remove and recycle their dollars through their community. It's going to uplift everybody, and it's going to be a very prosperous area. And if you continue to pollute those areas, you're going to see the downtrodden stay down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's great. One of the follow-ups on this particular question is about, and we've referenced it earlier, about working with other community organizations or partner agencies. Are there certain partnerships that each of you are looking at with your organizations to try to create a little bit more oomph in this area? Michael, maybe you just elaborate on that quickly.
I'm kind of glad you started with me, because our whole branch is about partnerships and collaboration. That's what we do. We want to make sure that we create community partnerships throughout the entire area. We've partnered with the Sierra Club, and like I said, I think before, is that we're so happy to have Connie Schmidt, who is now chairing our Environmental Justice Committee, and she is a Sierra Club member. We met at an environmental forum that we hosted, and she was excited, and we were excited, and she became a member and said, "Hey, I'd like to chair that committee," and we're absolutely ecstatic to have her. We're also partnering with a number of League of Women Voters chapters. Naperville is a very good partnership with us. We're partnering with Glen Ellyn now. I'm a member of the Roselle chapter. So those are just a few. We also partner with sororities, historic Greek Divine Nine sororities, fraternities, whenever we can, to especially when our commitment coincides with each other. And so we work the whole community and try to get as many partnerships going as possible.
That's great. That's great. And Jack, the Sierra Club?
Yeah, super important to us. We're going to need super majorities of the American public if we're going to need to make the policy changes that we need to save us all, particularly the most vulnerable. And so not all those constituents of our society are fully represented in the movement to save those. And that's really on us to make ourselves, our spaces from our most local to the top of the organization, more inclusive and representative of the voices who are most impacted. So we spend a lot of time at the Sierra Club thinking about how we're going to do that these days, because it's not only the right thing to do, to stand with the people who are most impacted by the problems we're trying to solve, but it's something we need to win. And this is a numbers game at the end of the day, right? This is a democracy. And if we team up, we can do these things, but that's not something we've excelled at in our history. And so just thinking about the work we're doing on the Clean Energy Jobs Act, for example, we are for the first time in partnership with people working on workforce development to try to figure out what the right ways are to get these jobs to people that need them most, to get the training to people who need the jobs the most, minority business organizations to try to figure out what contractors who are normally shut out of a lot of areas of economic opportunity, what are the policies that are going to help them build wealth in the communities that have been historically underinvested. So we're learning a lot of new things for people that, know a lot and have been working for a long time on rivers and forests and solar and stuff like that. We're learning about a lot of new policy areas that we're realizing are crucial to getting where we all need to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, and Jeff will probably speak to this too, just in terms of how do you move people on some of these issues, which, when you talk about, green jobs and things like that, how do you make it real for people? And certainly, getting back to the forests, et cetera, is a way to be able just to have people be aware of what's important in terms of what's around them, the air they breathe, et cetera. But Jeff, what sort of partnerships does the Forest Reserve look to try to get your message out?
I'm not even sure I have a clear answer to that at this point. I think it reaches out to the community as a whole. I think there's been some discussion. I was talking to the executive director about how instead of waiting people to come to us and we show them, we need to reach out more and find ways of doing that, particularly if we're preserving trees in our neighborhoods. I was just talking to Mark Franz, the village manager, just touching on that thought real quick, because there's some things going on in the village of Glen Ellyn that might be helpful that way. But I'm personally have also been involved with the Sierra Club locally here as a leader, and we created this DuPage Clean Energy Coalition. So that's been a partnership. I think Dan Hebriard is the president of the Forest Preserve District, and he came to a meeting or two. We've had other people come, elected officials come, just to to learn how to get engaged on the Clean Energy Jobs Act or other legislation for clean air and or for clean energy. And I think there's a lot of potential there. And I'm hoping to see more solar installations on the Forest Preserve property. If you go to Willowbrook, it's got a brand new solar installation. And that has interesting educational opportunities where you can show people, yes, it's real and it's happening. And this is how it's saving taxpayer dollars. And we hope to expand that to a few other buildings this year, or at least look at the engineering aspect of it. And so I think that's an interesting way of really reaching out to people to say, we're more than just trees, we're about quality of life. And with more solar, more trails in the right places and preserving certain natural areas and bringing people in. And I would love to see more partnerships. I think some school districts have been sending classes out, but I think we need, and we have actually some programs for education. You know, you can go to Willowbrook and look at animals. You know, that's great for little kids. And so they come close to something that they wouldn't, like a bobcat or a sandhill crane. These are wondrous creatures that really fascinate children. So I think that's a big part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. My daughter went to camp there, so
Okay.
she absolutely loved it. It was formative for her. Speaking of youth, that's the next question, and I think that climate change in particular seems to have captured the youth movement. There seems to be a lot of energy around environment, Greta Thunberg, and everything that's going on there. What sorts of things are your organizations doing to try to build on, connect with the energy of youth and how much they care about this topic? I can start with you, Jack.
Learn from them, for one thing. Over the last couple of years, it's been so impressive to see just them seize control. I mean, it was easier, of course, before COVID hit, but to see them not wait for older people to make their world safe has just been inspirational. And I'm sure, and continues in different ways, and I'm sure will resume in ways that we were seeing it before a year ago. And also, I think we're learning, yes, we need to figure out ways to make our spaces more welcoming to younger people who organize in different ways, who get information in different ways, who have different social networks than we do, trying to figure out how to make sure that the ways that we're interacting as the Sierra Club are not are as approachable and comfortable for them as they can be. That will not be done overnight, but it's something that we're cognizant of and working on trying to figure out. And I think whether it's youth or whether it's environmental justice communities, an important lesson that we're learning is to sometimes lead from behind. You know, sometimes in the environmental movement, you have a brand name like the Sierra Club, and sometimes we're used to being at the front of the march or at the podium or at the press conference. And increasingly, we're trying to let people most impacted speak for themselves. And sometimes that means being in the background and using tools that we might have that they don't have that can help them speak in their own words and in their own voice directly to the people that need to hear, as opposed to them being under an umbrella or a brand that we might that might be in our frame.
Michael, the NAACP has been youth outreach or a lot of interest in youth supporting the climate and the environmental justice aspects of your work?
Yes, we have a program called AXO that is basically, it's a long acronym, but it's an academic Olympics. And one of the things, it was started a few years ago, probably like 40, by Vernon Jarrett at the Sun-Times. And his whole issue was to see African Americans and Black people in positive manners outside of entertainment and athletics. So he created this academic Olympics. The NAACP has adopted it. During that, in that program, we set them up with mentors. We work with Fermi Labs, work with Argonne Labs, we work with a lot of the schools. And what it's a lot of times centered around STEM projects. And in those projects, just one off the top of my mind, a young lady designed, we're talking high school, she designed an entire city. It was a model of a city with hydraulics where if a hurricane came through, the whole city, buildings, everything could be hydraulically put underground. These kids compete nationally with these projects. Our DuPage chapter is very, very proud of that program. We medal more than any other branch in the nation. I think 2 years ago, we came away with 38 categories. We came away with 21 medals. We are the gold standard for that project. Our youth program also partners with food banks because again, food deserts are a big focus with us. And they volunteer in those areas also. And they also volunteer in some of the forest preserves to help clean it up. You know, we know that a lot of people go through and they litter, and some of our forest preserves can be pretty bad looking. And our youth councils have gone out and adopted portions of the forest preserve and have worked on cleaning those up too. So they're very active.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And do you specifically, one of the questions that popped up is related to this, and that's about educating and involving children, even going younger than the youth movement, in terms of these environmental justice issues?
Oh yeah, as a matter of fact, and I wasn't there, but our youth council invited, again, one of our favorite people, Connie Schmidt, did a full presentation for our youth council. I think it was last Sunday. And also another one of her co-chairs, thinking I can't, my mind is,
That's okay. Well, we can follow up with
I
you
can't pull her
afterwards.
name, but they both were invited out to the youth council,
Mhm.
and they were really excited that they got invited, because our youth council, you can't go to our youth council meetings without being invited. They pick them out to come in and do the presentation for them. And they were really, really excited about doing
That's great. And we'll jump over to Jeff in terms of not only the sort of the youth movement around climate, but also
it. Teresa Quain, that's her. That's
great. Okay. Also about how you try to educate children about this topic, if you do, or if there are plans to.
Yeah, not about this specific project. I think but it's interesting. We have it, like say, in an archery program at Blackwell. Children go out and learn how to shoot bows and arrows. And so they seem to engage in physical activity. So that's at an earlier age. They're not necessarily thinking about climate change or justice, environmental justice, or anything serious. They're just into activities. But how do you get them out in the woods? There's some areas of collaboration in terms of buying land and making it available to park districts. Like the Glen Ellyn Park District has Churchill Park, which is actually partly owned by the Forest Preserve District. We have an area in Wheaton, the Lincoln Marsh. I think the Forest Preserve District helped acquire that land. There's a co-ownership there, I think, with the Wheaton Park District. So that's where you can really get out in wet, marshy area. Those two places have wet, marshy areas and water. And my wife and I were in the Big Brother, Big Sister program years ago, and we had a 10-year-old, and he just wanted to go fishing for a while. So we just went to forest preserves. And I think once they establish that connection with nature, then maybe later on, they're ready to deal with more serious issues of how to preserve it, and how to preserve our planet, and how to preserve the health of our communities. That's the only hope I can have. But this is a good discussion, because it means I'm going to go back and talk to staff at the Forest Preserve and say, what are we doing? What am I missing? Because there's so much we have going on. I don't know it all yet. So there could be some cool things that I haven't heard of yet. But, and if we're not doing it, we should start doing it. And looking for more ways to engage youth in a serious way.
I'm doing a self-time check here, and we've got about 10 minutes left of discussion. So this has gone really fast so far. I want to harken back to a question that came up on the Q&A that actually Jack answered in part, but I want to get everyone's perspective on that. Also, the League of Women Voters has a book club, and we just finished a book called Garbology by Edward Hume. And I don't know if any of you read that. It's a few years old, but it's excellent. It's about how our garbage is processed, what's in our garbage, who makes our garbage, where does our garbage get put, and often it's in communities that are more Black and brown. But the question specifically that came from our audience here from David Evans is, how concerned should we be about small amounts of pharmaceuticals and microscopic plastics in our water? Are these threats to health, and is there an effort to start measuring more things like this in water supplies? So Jack, I'll let you start because you started to answer it online, and obviously we've distracted you on other topics, but are there other things that you would like to add to it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely a threat to our health. And again, here, this is a case where it's a threat to everyone's health, but people who are experiencing other health challenges disproportionately, it's an even bigger threat. So this is why things like access to affordable healthcare and are particularly are justice issues as well as environmental issues. And so, when we think about, you're pointing out two emerging problems, and monitoring is usually what we do to try to detect a problem that we know is already there. And so usually so much easier and safer and cheaper to reduce the problem before we have to monitor for it. And so, yes, we should be doing more monitoring. And I think that our wastewater agencies are working on things like pharmaceuticals, but it is so much more important and urgent that we just take steps to keep these things out of our water supply in the first place. I mean, they are already there. We are not going to get to zero plastic pollution in our water and food supply, unfortunately. It's in the water we drink. It's in the food we eat already. That's something that we've already done to ourselves. So it's really time. And unfortunately, this work has had a setback in COVID-19. But I do think that this is one of the issues that our members feel the most passionate about. And I think that we need to prioritize this even more in the future.
Mhm.
Jeff or Michael, do either of your organizations have a policy on this, or are working aware of this situation?
Mm.
Michael, no?
Right now, no, but again, we understand that, like you said, food, pharmaceuticals, and the health of our water in general is the key to our survival. And one of the things that I think we need to do a better job is educating the community. A lot of people just don't know what the effects are of dumping things into their water. Oh, I have these pills are expired. I'm gonna dump them down the toilet, and I'm gonna throw them down, in the trash, whatever. But we really do, as a community, need to get better at educating us on why we need to recycle and what the recycling program is and how to best utilize it, because that's one of the ways we'll keep our environment clean and safe.
Right. And Jeff, any other view from the floor?
Yes. There is one thing we've been doing is focusing on the health of our streams and working with other partners like municipal and county level. You have urban areas, you have like sealants, driveway sealants that create some very toxic compounds. And if you use coal tar, it's the worst by far. And that ends up in your home. It ends up washing into this, because we have, the storm water system is separate from the sanitary system. And so that all ends up in the water. And we also have a lot of salt runoff, and that affects how ecosystems thrive in aquatic environments. And we've been trying to restore some streams. We're working to remove a dam on Salt Creek in Oak Brook area. and been looking at other dams historically, and some have been removed. There's one dam in Naperville that you need for flood control, but other dams are they're just there as artifacts of history. They had a use a long time ago, but they're messing up the streams. So that involves a lot of public education because you're changing something. People like dams, apparently, and they perceive them as good things. And we're saying, no, they're not always. And that's a tough one, but it does involve stream restoration, and we have some monies that we can put to bear on that. It's a form of infrastructure improvement. Like if you go to St. James Farm, you can see a recently completed reconstruction of Spring Brook, they call it. It used to, basically, it's mostly sewage water from the city of Wheaton, fairly clean. But if there's something in that water, you can create an ecosystem that cleans it up before it goes further downstream. So you could be introducing native mussels, and we got a urban stream research center that does a lot of work with mussels. It's nationally recognized. So, and that's a really cool thing about my job now, is to learn about this stuff and be engaged with it. So there's a lot of things we can do, and to understand what that means for the public from their point of view. They know that there's some big money involved sometimes, and we got to explain to them, this is why it's happening the way it is. This is why it's important. Here's the science, and here's the benefits. So
yeah. So we are running out of time here, and I have one last question for all of you, and it's really about thinking about this audience and speaking directly to this audience. And if they were to ask you, what can I do? What are things that I can do now, or volunteer, or what can I read, or what social media sites should I follow to make sure that I'm up to speed on this, and you know, give me action. Tell me something that I can do to contribute and help. Jack, would you like to start us off on that one?
Sure. So I would think about places where you have power or a voice. And, you know, if you live in Glen Ellyn, for example, think about all the reasons why Glen Ellyn's a great place to live and why other people might want to live there. And think about the changes that might be made, that people who are coming from areas where they're facing pollution burden and other societal and structural barriers. What are the barriers to them coming to live in Glen Ellyn? So when Glen Ellyn or your village thinks about things that may not seem like environmental issues, but when they think about, you know, whether or not Glen Ellyn businesses are going to pay the minimum wage, or whether or not you're going to have affordable housing policies, or whether or not you're going to be a welcoming community to immigrants and new citizens, like these are ways that we can combat environmental injustice by making sure that all of our communities are as equal as possible. All of these things are solutions to concentrating poverty and other societal factors that make people vulnerable to these environmental problems. And those are ways that those are places that we have particular influence. And if we look at the bigger picture, I think we can find new and different reasons to be motivated to jump into fights like that for people that need our help.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jeff, your view, what can the folks do here besides, you know, maybe take a walk in the woods?
yeah, well, it's hard to add to what Jack just said, but I think we do need to look at communities and what's happening around us near the preserves. Do they have access to preserves? And looking at the whole total picture of, you know, why people live here, what their stories are, and being aware of their issues. And I think we really need to find ways of reaching out to people. And so I think to be engaged, you just sort of look around and see what's going on locally. If there's a group, I get on their mailing list and actually open the emails, don't just delete them, which is what most people do. So they're missing opportunities. So yeah, just and pay attention to local races. We have election coming up. A lot of them are not partisan per se, but they come from, but they have partisan viewpoints, if you will, you know, in terms of how you deal with reopening schools in this new COVID environment, or how you run municipal governments or township governments, some of whom have been like single party rule for a long time. Is that healthy or not? But talk to people of both parties, or both, whatever background they have, and say, why are you running and what are your goals and how are you going to help the community be a better place? I think that's I think getting engaged with, and some of these people need to be hearing questions about the environment, like, why are there so many trucks in Addison? What can we do better about that? Or, it could go in a dozen different directions. But I think people have a lot of room to get engaged.
Right, absolutely. And Michael, I'll give you the last word on this one. What can we all do on this issue?
Well, when we get new members coming in, I always ask one question: what's your passion? And one of the things that, when it comes to the environment, it's this huge topic, and it has all these subsets. So I said the same thing: find out what your passion is. It could be water reclamation, it could be air pollution, it could be um, climate change, whatever your passion is. And that's the one thing I find about environmentalists, is that they're very, very passionate people about their causes. And then I say seek out an organization that has a like mind. Um, Naturally, I'm going to advocate being a member of the NAACP, but again, there's the League of Women Voters out there, there's the Sierra Clubs, there's many other environmental organizations out there that you can partner with. And the synergy of just being around people of like-mindedness will spark ideas. And again, I think that I'm kind of prejudiced, but I think the world of our environmental co-chairs, Terry Quain and Connie Schmidt, and you're gonna see some exciting things from them as soon as we get past COVID. We're going to be looking at some environmental fairs, some education about recycling, and just a whole host of things that I believe that she's coming down the pipe with.
That's great. Well, we'll be reaching out to all three of you to get any resources that you might recommend, links or social sites, etc., so that we can create a bit of a resource for people who are on this Zoom call. We had also a couple questions that weren't answered, and we may come back to you to help us try to answer those for those folks. So I want to, looking at the time, I want to hand it over to our co-president, Eric. And thank you very much to our panelists for this great conversation. I think we could have talked for at least another hour about all this. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I want to just say it was not only an excellent discussion, but also shared ways for us to be involved. And there's that difference between being informed about something, but being engaged in it, right? And that's the message that I think I took away as well. So thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen for one last moment this evening and go through a couple of announcements. We can never get away from a league meeting without sharing some announcements. So good reminder of what we spoke about tonight and what this definition is. And again, we'll share this on our website as well as our Facebook page so folks can go back to this. We did record this tonight, as we told you. It will be both on our League of Women Voters website, lwvge.org, as well as a YouTube upload also. We have a partnership we're supporting, and I will admit that I'm in a grassroots level of this for the last year on a referendum question for Milton Township to form a mental health board, community mental health board. And I want to mention that this is on the ballot. It is the only referendum question on our ballot for Milton Township, all the way at the end. So you need to scroll all the way to the end when you do go to vote. And we ask that you take a look at the facts to engage on the website, Mental Health Boards for DuPage. Rather, it's a Facebook page, Mental Health Boards for DuPage. Lots of great information, including what's on our screen here. And I want to thank this very kind of a bipartisan group of folks who have come together, including our youth, to provide much needed support in Milton Township. There is a lot of misunderstanding of what's not available sometimes at the county and state level, although people assume that it should be facilitated by that level of government. In fact, townships, one of their core focuses is our social programs. And so we want to make sure that we encourage this referendum and encourage you to get the information from it. So thank you for taking a look at this as well. The other thing we want to mention is our candidate forum coming up on Saturday, our last set of candidate forums, 9 o'clock, Milton Township Supervisor, 2 candidates for the supervisor position, and then District 87 School Board at 10 a.m., 8 candidates, 4 positions that are turning over. And so that starts at 10 o'clock. And we will have a moderator who has done our previous, which are now available on video, as you can see on the screen here. The District 41 School Board and Village, Glen Ellyn Village President, and then our Glen Ellyn Village Trustees and District 89. So please go to our website to watch that, or YouTube. You can see our voting brand up here: be vocal, vote local. We've talked a lot about this tonight already as a part of the impetus for getting out there and becoming engaged. And so we want to make sure that people think about that. Early voting has begun now through April 5th to Page County Fairgrounds. Please go to Building 5 and you can see the dates on here, and then the weekends. March 22nd through April 3rd. So starting on Monday, the 22nd, the College of DuPage on Faywell Boulevard at the Instructional Center, I believe it's called. I know that I went there last time to vote, so please make sure that you get out there and vote. Thank you to Alex Darrow, who coordinated our evening tonight, and all your work for all of our meetings throughout the year to keep us informed about natural resources and environmental justice issues. Kristen, and my personal thanks to Karen Daly, who we have tapped mercilessly over the last several months, and has been just a wonderful moderator for tonight. Jeff Garris, thank you. Michael Childress, thank you. Jack Darren, thank you for your efforts, your contributions, and all you're doing for our community. And to all of our members who are on, and our community members, thank you for coming tonight. Please be invested in your community, be involved. You know that the League is here to answer any questions. Go to our website and our Facebook page and get involved. And thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Great conversation.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everyone.
It was. Thank you.